Hey everybody, this is herculespetix, founder, curator, docent, and gift shop employee of the herculespetix Academy of Comic Book Studies. Today we're going to continue our scholarly examination of War Against Crime, the pre-trend EC comic from the late 40s. This is number 10 from 1949, and once again we have a nice Johnny Craig cover. This is kind of interesting, showing how the pre-trend is becoming more like the new trend every month. There's word balloons on the cover, and basically what they're giving us here is the twist ending to a story that is not in the comic and has no story. It's just the twist ending. This guy says, "I don't understand." This headline says that I've been murdered. And this guy's got a gun behind his back, and he says, "It's no mistake, JB, that's tomorrow's paper." So it's like instead of having a 7-page story leading up to this, they just give us the punchline. Also, if you notice this blurb, this is very important in comics history. This is the first Vault of Horror story. They decided to do a trial run in War Against Crime. EC had not done horror comics up to that point, and within a year or two, of course, the horror comics would revolutionize the industry. Also, comic book history. It was definitely a huge moment in comics history. So we start off with the Vault of Horror story, Buried Alive, and this is drawn by Al Feldstein. We see the Vault Keeper for the first time. So the format's pretty much like the horror comics that would take over, in a few years. But there is a difference. The Vault Keeper, the horror host, isn't making all these dumb puns and stuff and goofy jokes. So they haven't figured that part of the formula out yet. Kind of a more sedate Al Feldstein art. A little crude, not as stylized as he could be in the science fiction titles. Just this splash page is so lackluster. It's like kind of dull. I don't know why the Vault Keeper's like so far away in the shot. So he narrates the story of John Rockwell, who's a gravedigger. Doesn't like his job. He gets creeped out every time he has to, work at the funerals. And he hangs out at this local bar most nights after work. There's a guy there who's like kind of his only friend in the world. His name's Fred. He's pretty much the only one he knows and talks to. And he tells him about how he's not thrilled with his job. And Fred says, "Oh man, I don't envy you. You know what I'd be terrified of if I had your job is burying someone who's still alive." And he tells him about catalepsy, how it makes you appear dead for a short amount of time. And people get buried sometimes because everyone thinks they're dead. And then they wake up in the grave. This is a horrible way to go. But that night, John has a nightmare about doing his job and burying someone alive, someone screaming from the coffin. So it freaks him out so much that he drives over to the cemetery where he works and digs up the grave that he just made that day to check if the guy's actually dead. Of course he is. And he goes back to his house and he's like, "Man, I'm losing it. I gotta take a vacation." So the next morning, the newspaper has a headline, "Grave robbed and desecrated, left open. All the valuables were taken out of it." And now he really thinks he's going crazy. He's like, "I know I put the soil back on that grave. Am I going crazy?" So the next day he talks to Fred, and Fred's like, "Man, you got to get another job. You look terrible. And I think it's ruining your health, this job." That night he has another nightmare. Same thing happens. He goes back to the cemetery to check on the body. This time he makes double sure that he's packed the soil down in the grave and reburied it, But there's the same headline the next day. So now he's just like, "What the hell? I'm fucking crazy." A few days later, Fred knocks on his door to check on him because he hasn't seen him at the bar, and he finds him dead. Or is he? It's kind of weird how Feldstein draws John as if he has women's breasts. I don't know. I guess they're just really well-developed pecs, but they look like women's breasts. So Fred's a nice guy, and he knows that John has no family and no friends, so he basically pays for the funeral himself. And since he's making the arrangements, he tells the mortician, he says, I want to make sure that, all of his watches and rings and valuables are buried with him. He would have wanted it that way. So there's a funeral for John Rockwell. Only a handful of people show up. I really like this panel of just the quiet of night in the cemetery. But then suddenly the quiet is broken by a scream. And, of course, it's John. John had a cataleptic fit. And now he wakes up in his own grave. He struggles at first, but then he realizes he has to save his oxygen. He's slowly blacking out, but then he hears a shovel, the sound of a shovel breaking ground. And he's like, oh my God, maybe it's the grave robber. And so it's a race against time because he's totally out of oxygen. And the guy's getting closer and closer. He can hear the shovel getting closer. And the grave robber opens up the coffin. And just then, John wakes up. And he recognizes the grave robber. It's Fred. Fred's the grave robber. And Fred, instantly, he just loses his mind. His mind cracks. He's just like, you're dead. You're supposed to be dead. He starts laughing maniacally. And so then the vault keeper informs us that he was put in a mental institution. And then John went on to become an undertaker. So I guess he's making a better living in the dying business. But it just seems weird that the whole idea of funerals creeped him out. But now he still has to deal with them. So there you have it, guys. The very first Vault of Horror, very first EC horror story. So they're on their way. They don't quite have the formula down yet. It's obviously not as gruesome as they would become 2. It's pretty tame. So the next story is called The Man Death Wanted. This says that it's a true story from police files, but those are always lies. This is another John Alton drawn story. This one's a lot less wonky than that last one we saw. A little more sedate. Look at these colors, though. That's just like really bizarre, like modern art or something. So this guy Gordon is hanging out one day. He gives his cat some milk. The cat keels over dead instantly. And he's like, smells the milk. He's like, this milk's been poisoned. He gets it tested, and sure enough, he's right. So he's walking around dazed. He's like, who would want to kill me? What the hell? He says, I got to get away. I got to go on a vacation. So everyone wants to go on vacation in this comic. There's a woman, though, kind of in the shadows looking at Gordon. And she's thinking in a thought bubble, thinks he's alive. So we don't know what the hell's up with this. And then she calls out his name. And he says, what do you want? Kind of scared. And then all of a sudden this car peels around the corner and tries to run Gordon down. John leaps at the last second and just barely escapes getting run over. That panel looks so Steve Ditko to me. It's nice. So when he gets back to his apartment, that woman is there waiting, and she's got a gun. And she says, no, I'm not going to kill you. They're trying to kill, the same people who are trying to kill me, who are trying to kill you. So she tells him that she was a secretary for this, his uncle, who lives in Australia. He left Gordon all of his money. Gordon didn't even know. He didn't even hear the news. So basically, he's a millionaire, and he doesn't know it. So the uncle's son, Everett, he hated his father and tried to kill him. And that's why the uncle left all of the money to his nephew, Gordon. So she flew all the way from Australia to warn him. So she informed the police, but she had no photograph of Everett, so it's slow going. They're having a hard time finding him. So he says, I was planning on going on vacation. You want to join me? So they very carefully make their way to the train station. They know that there's all these guys out to kill him. I guess, Everett's pretty rich. So he hired a bunch of goons. It seems like there's all these suspicious looking characters at the train station, so they're very wary. And then sure enough, this guy approaches them with a gun. And Gordon gets this adrenaline rush and just tackles the guy and beats the crap out of him. And the guy jumps off the train. He escapes. So they get to the place where they're vacationing. He tells the authorities about his situation. So they say, okay, we'll assign a police officer to follow you around. So they're going to take a midnight canoe ride. And Everett's there with a couple of his goons. Everett overhears this. So he gets a motorboat. And they totally ram the boat. Gordon and Nadia jump in the water. And then they start Tommy gunning the water. His goons have got machine guns. And our protagonists sneak into the capsized canoe under it. And Everett thinks he succeeded. He says, the fortune belongs to me. They're not coming up. I killed them. When he gets to the dock, one of the police officers there that's looking after Gordon, and he says, I heard some gunshots out there. Do you know anything about it? And Everett says, it's the motor. It's backfiring a lot. So the cop doesn't believe it. He's unsatisfied with the answer, so he searches the boat. He doesn't find the Tommy guns, though, because they're under the floorboards. And just then, Gordon and Nadia have just gotten to the docks. They swam the whole way. So then Everett pulls out a gun and is going to shoot the cop. But the cop gets the drop on him. And he says, you're coming along with us. The Australian police have wired us that they have proof that you killed your uncle. And you're going to stand trial. And the cop says, you're a very lucky man, Gordon Kimball. And he says, I'm double lucky. Because now I have a wife, too. Me and Nadia are getting married. That was quick. We have one of those short stories. Oh, man, this one's amazing. It's called Perfect Murder. It's drawn by this guy named Fred Peters, who I guess I've seen him before because I have most of the EC stuff, and he drew a handful of stories for EC in the late 40s, even into the early 50s, the new trend era. But it seems like, according to the internet, that's all he drew. Because I guess this guy was an animator for Disney. I think he worked on a bunch of Pluto cartoons. And man, this guy's style is nuts. I really like it, though. It's really crazy. I mean, just look at this, the way he draws the folds in fabric and stuff. And even though they're in a enclosed room, his tie is blowing in the wind. Just really nice looking stuff. So basically we start the story off. We're in the office of this local mob boss named Tuffy Parker. That's a great name. And I guess this guy, the stranger, or at first he doesn't recognize him. He's shaking him down. He says, from now on, I'm your business partner. And Tuffy's like, you don't know who you're talking to, mister. Get the hell out of here. Man, look at these faces. Really bizarre style of drawing. Look at more of these crazy wrinkles. And then basically he says, he reveals that he's Murray Winter. And Tuffy recognizes him now. I guess they used to do crimes together back when they were younger. And Tuffy pretends to relent and give in, but he presses this button on his desk. And then his two goons come in, and Tuffy's like, get rid of this trash. So Murray reaches for his gun, but they conk him on the head. Man, check this out. Just really insane line work here. These folds on their clothes. Bern Hogarth would be rolling over in his bed at the time, I guess. It's just like abstract art. Doesn't look like anything in the real world. So Tuffy has this plan. He says, it's pretty risky of him to be carrying a gun around. He's on parole. So we'll make sure that cops find out he's got a gun. We'll plant the gun back on his body, and then we'll give him these knockout drops. And we'll put him in some room, some flophouse room, and we'll inform the cops that he's there to pick him up. And he'll be sent back up the river. He'll be out of my hair. So they do just that. They take him to this crappy place and slip him a Mickey. And then they go to make the phone call to the cops. But for some reason, he wakes up only 10 minutes later, just in time to hear the police sirens approaching. So I don't know why he's not catatonic. They supposedly gave him enough of this drug to knock him out for days. Also, the little plot point, I guess if you give someone too much of this, it's total poison. You got to be careful how much you give him. So he's lucky he's not dead. So he hits the rooftops and flees from the police. So then he calls up Tuffy, and he pretends to be this other old compatriot of theirs. I think his name is Joker. And he disguises his voice and says, hey, it's Joker. I still got that money from our last job. I want to share it with you. And then he goes over to Tuffy's office. And when he enters the office, Tuffy's got his back turned. He's fixing drinks. He's like, oh, Joker. It's the whole trio's in town today. I just saw Murray earlier. And when he turns around, he sees that it's Murray. And Murray kills him, shoots him dead. And then as he's gloating over the body, he picks up the martini that Tuffy was making. And I guess he reveals that he killed Joker last night with that same gun that he's got now. And then all of a sudden he starts feeling groggy. And he's like, you double dirty crosser. You were out to kill Joker yourself. This drink is poisoned. And thus ended Murray Winter's voyage into vengeance. Very goofy story. And but man, this art is just, I really like it. Nice stuff. Another short story, letter page, and then we have the last story, The Idol's Revenge by Johnny Craig. And I like this little splash here. So basically, this archaeologist, he's in the Himalayas, and he heard about this temple of the shadow god. Supposedly there's all this buried riches in there, and he wants to find them. His name's Steve Murray. So he finds the temple. He finds that crazy statue of the shadow god, and there's a giant ruby in its forehead. And he takes it out. So he's showing his friend, I think his name's Ed, yeah. And they're kind of joking around about how, like, oh, I supposedly have a curse on me now. I guess the shadow god will be haunting me. But he doesn't really believe it. So he's on a ship back to the States, and he looks out his porthole one night, and he sees what looks like the shadow god. And he pulls his gun and fires at him. this woman from next door, she runs in to see what the hell's going on. And he tells her the story, and she's like, I think you dreamt it. She doesn't believe him. She thinks he's nuts. So I guess the next night, they're hanging out. And he shows her the ruby. And then she looks out onto the ocean, and like almost hovering in the clouds is a giant shadow god. There's a hole where the stolen ruby should have been in his forehead. So she says, I saw it. I thought you dreamt it. Oh my God. So the next day he's about to dive into the swimming pool. He's just going to relax, trying not to think about the shadow god. And he sees the shadow god like in the bottom of the pool. It's just as he dives, so it kind of fucks up his dive. So he lands on his back hard as a stone. Hits the water hard. Kind of like half knocks him out. And as he's sinking, he sees the shadow god. And he thinks he's a goner. But then that woman, Dottie dives in and rescues him. So now back in America, he invites her to stay with him in his cabin. He's got a hunting lodge. He's cleaning his gun one day, and he looks out the window, sees the shadow god, fires at him. And when Dottie runs in, it's almost like he's hysterical. He's like, I killed him. I killed Malnat, the shadow god. And she's like, God, you sound crazy. You sound like you're mad. Which is kind of weird because she did see the shadow god on the ship. So you'd think she'd just be like, oh, really? But I just wanted to say, Johnny Craig, over the past few issues, we've seen him become more and more the Johnny Craig that we know and love. And he's really getting that nice stylized look now. So he runs out into the woods and he sees the shadow god. But he trips and falls right as he's about to fire at the shadow god. And then he says, I hit somebody. What? And he hears like someone crashing through the woods, and he sees this figure. And he can tell that the guy's holding his hand. He's injured. So he runs after him saying, hey, I want to apologize. It was an accident. It turns out it's Ed, his buddy. And he says, Ed, you were back in India the last time I saw you. What are you doing here? And he makes up some bullshit like, oh, I was just out in the woods. And then Steve looks down and he sees this flashlight that Ed dropped. And it's got like a black paper over it that makes the shadow god, in the shape of the shadow god. It's got like a cutout. And so Ed admits that he's been embezzling from the museum. He knew that Steve would find out about it when he checked the expedition accounts. So he was trying to basically have him declared insane, or even, hopefully, that he would kill himself. So then he bolts. And Steve says, Ed, watch out. And then the real shadow god shows up. We don't even see him. And he attacks Ed. 15 minutes later, Dottie finds him really badly shaken. And Steve says, I found him half-eaten, Malnat and his vengeance. So I guess for, the shadow god was wanted to kill Ed for the effrontery of, imitating him. And she says, don't worry about that, Steve. Let's concentrate on our future happiness. So I'm sure they're going to get married. Like all these old easy stories. Everyone ends up getting married at the end. I really like that face there. If you notice like how different this is than EC would become in just a few years, or a year or two. We don't even see the attack of the god attacking Ed. We don't see the gore, his half-eaten body. It's they definitely weren't as bold in 1949 as they would soon become. Another letter page, kind of a nice treat. Some reader, T. Miller, sent in a comic strip. I don't feel like reading it though, but that's a nice little bonus. So there you go, guys. War Against Crime number 10. I hope you enjoyed watching this video. They're definitely improving. There's one more issue, and I hope it has a Vault of Horror story in it, because it's kind of fascinating seeing these prototypical EC horror comics before they had it nailed down. So that's it for today's video, and I hope to see you next time here at the Herculespetix Academy of Comic Book Studies.